There is a coffee can of white powder sitting on a shelf in my barn right now, and every dog on this farm gets a handful worked into its coat every single week, and not one of them has worn a flea collar or taken a chemical pill in 11 years. It costs about $6 a bag, and it lasts most of a season. It will not harm the dog. It will not harm the children who wrestle with that dog in the hay every single afternoon. It will not harm the barn cats who sleep curled up against the same dog at night. It only kills one kind of creature, and it kills it without a single drop of chemical touching my dog's skin. My name is Eli. I am Amish. I have raised working dogs on this farm my whole life. Dogs that spend all day in tall grass, in the woods, along the creek where the deer walk through, exactly where fleas and ticks live and breed, and I have watched 3 generations of farm dogs grow old on this same property without a single flea collar between them. And in 11 years, I have never once pulled an engorged tick off one of my dogs, because they never make it that far. We have no vet bill every spring for a flea and tick prescription. We have no chemical collar releasing pesticide against my dog's neck for 3 months straight. We have no spot-on treatment that leaves a greasy patch between his shoulder blades that my own children are told not to touch for 2 full days. I'm going to show you exactly what we do, in the order we do it, with what it costs and how often. Then, I am going to tell you the part that should bother you a little, which is that most of the flea and tick products sold in stores today are the same class of chemical as agricultural pesticide, diluted down and put in a smaller bottle. And the companies selling them know most dog owners will never read the label closely enough to notice. Stay with me. By the end of this, you will know exactly how to protect your dog from fleas and ticks for the whole season for less than the cost of 1 month of a prescription chewable, and it will not put a single systemic pesticide into your dog's bloodstream. Let me start with what most people get wrong, because if you do not understand this, none of what I show you will make sense. When I was younger, maybe 19, I bought into the same fear every dog owner falls into. Quick word before I go further. The old methods my family uses, there is more of it than fits in any one video. I gathered the whole of it into a book you can buy in our pinned comment below. The book is the long version. If you want it, it is there. I will not mention it again. I saw one tick on my dog's ear, panicked, and drove into town to buy the strongest spot-on treatment the feed store carried, the kind you squeeze between the shoulder blades. Within a day, my dog was drooling and shaking his head, rubbing his neck against the porch post like something was burning him, because that is exactly what was happening. A concentrated dose of pesticide sitting on his skin, strong enough to kill a tick through contact, and strong enough to make a 40-pound dog miserable for 2 full days. I felt terrible watching him suffer over a single tick I could have just pulled off with my fingers in about 10 seconds with a pair of tweezers. He would not eat that whole evening, just lay on the porch boards with his head down, and my youngest sister kept asking me why he was acting sick, and I did not have a good answer for her, because I had done that to him myself, trying to fix a problem that barely existed in the first place. That was the day I went looking for a different way. And what I found was the same thing my grandfather had already been doing with our farm dogs for 30 years, without ever calling it anything special. So what does actually keep a working dog free of fleas and ticks all season, if the strong chemical treatments come with a cost like that? Here is the part almost nobody explains, and it is the whole reason my grandfather's method works without a single pesticide touching my dog's bloodstream. Fleas and ticks are not soft-bodied insects the way a mosquito is. They are covered in a hard, waxy outer shell called an exoskeleton, and that shell is what keeps them from drying out. Diatomaceous earth, the powder I keep in that coffee can, is not a poison at all. It is the crushed, fossilized shells of tiny ancient algae called diatoms, mined from old lake beds and dried, ground down into a powder so fine it feels soft to your hand. But under a microscope, every grain is sharp, almost like broken glass at a scale too small to see or feel. When that powder gets onto a flea or a tick, it scratches through the waxy coating on their shell. And once that coating is broken, the insect loses water through its body and dries out within a day or 2. It is not a chemical kill. It is a physical one, the same way you or I would eventually dry out and die of thirst with no water at all, except it happens to an insect in about 24 hours instead of days. That is the whole mechanism, and it is why fleas and ticks cannot build up a resistance to it the way they increasingly do to chemical pesticides. You cannot evolve a defense against having your waterproof coating scratched away. Compare that to the chemical products sold at every pet store and vet office. Spot-on treatments and prescription chewables use compounds from the same broad chemical families as agricultural insecticides, things like isoxazolines and pyrethroids, engineered to enter your dog's bloodstream or skin oils and kill insects that bite. They are effective, I will not pretend otherwise, but they carry a cost most owners never hear discussed. A single dose of a common prescription chewable runs between $15 and $30 a month, adding up to well over $200 a year for one dog, and there have been enough reported cases of dogs having neurological reactions, tremors, seizures, that in recent years, regulatory agencies in more than one country have required stronger warning labels on that entire class of product. And more than one veterinarian I have spoken with says they now ask owners to watch their dog closely for the first 48 hours after every single dose. The sharp difference is this: the expensive path puts a pesticide inside your dog's own body every single month indefinitely for the life of the dog. The $6 path works entirely on the outside, mechanically, with nothing for your dog's liver or kidneys to process at all. The counterintuitive truth my grandfather understood before anyone had a name for diatomaceous earth is that you do not need to poison your dog to protect your dog. You just need to make the outside of your dog and the space around your dog a place a flea or a tick cannot survive. This is not some obscure Amish secret either, in case you are wondering if I am exaggerating how well known this is. Food-grade diatomaceous earth has been used in grain storage for nearly a century to protect wheat and corn from insects without any chemical residue, because farmers needed something that would not contaminate food they were about to sell or eat themselves. And the exact same physical mechanism that protects a grain bin works on a dog's coat. Agricultural extension offices in several states publish guides on using it for pest control precisely because it does not build resistance and does not require the reapplication warnings that chemical products do. My grandfather did not learn this from a laboratory. He learned it from watching what actually worked on animals that had to survive without any veterinary pharmacy for 100 miles in either direction. And what worked was almost always the simplest, most physical solution available, not the most complicated one. So here's exactly what my grandfather taught me, and what I do now for every dog on this farm in order. The first step is the coat treatment itself. Once a week, outside, never in a closed room, you work a small handful of food-grade diatomaceous earth into your dog's coat down to the skin, working from the tail toward the head against the grain of the fur, paying extra attention to the base of the tail, behind the ears, and the belly, which are the spots fleas and ticks favor most. You want a light, even dusting, not a thick coat. About a tablespoon for a medium-sized dog is plenty. The trick almost everyone gets wrong here is doing it indoors or standing directly over the dog while you work it in, because the fine dust can irritate your own lungs and your dog's if you breathe it in directly, so you do this outside, upwind, and you avoid the eyes and nose entirely. The second step is the weekly flea comb, and this is the step people skip because it feels old-fashioned, but it is the one that actually tells you whether your first step is working. A metal flea comb, about $4, run through the coat once a week, especially around the neck and tail, will physically pull out any fleas or flea dirt, which looks like tiny black flecks of pepper, before they ever get established. If you comb and find nothing for 3 straight weeks, you know your prevention is holding. If you find activity, you know to treat again immediately instead of waiting for a full-blown infestation to show itself. I keep a small jar of soapy water next to me while I comb, and anything the comb pulls out goes straight into that jar, since soapy water breaks the surface tension on a flea's body and drowns it in seconds, which is a small detail, but it means nothing you comb out ever has the chance to jump right back onto the dog or into the carpet. The third step is the yard, because a dog that is clean but living in a flea-infested yard is fighting a losing battle every single day. You dust diatomaceous earth along the fence line, under the porch, and in any shaded, humid spots where your dog rests, since flea eggs and larvae need that kind of environment to survive outside a host. You also keep the grass cut short, because fleas and ticks both wait on tall grass blades for a host to brush past, a behavior called questing, and short grass gives them far fewer places to perch and wait. In the early spring, before the grass really starts growing, I also dust a light line of diatomaceous earth along the base of the fence and around the doghouse itself, since that is where eggs laid the previous fall are most likely to have overwintered, and catching them before they hatch in the warm weeks of April saves a lot of trouble come June. The fourth step is the bedding, and this is simple but easy to forget. Every single week, your dog's bedding gets washed in hot water, at least 130 degrees, because flea eggs and larvae can survive a cool or warm wash, but not sustained heat that high, and running it through a hot dryer cycle afterward finishes off anything the wash itself might have missed. A dog bed that never gets washed hot is a flea nursery sitting in your house no matter how well you treat the dog itself. And I have seen owners do everything right on the dog and still fight a flea problem for months, simply because they forgot the bed sitting in the corner of the kitchen. The fifth step, and the one my grandmother added to the system years ago, is a diluted apple cider vinegar rinse after bath time. About 1 part vinegar to 3 parts water. Poured over the coat and left to dry without rinsing out. It will not kill anything on its own, but the smell and the change in the skin's natural pH make your dog a noticeably less attractive host to begin with, which means fewer fleas and ticks ever try to make a home there in the first place. One natural product I keep alongside the diatomaceous earth for extra protection in the worst weeks of summer is a properly diluted cedarwood oil spray. Cedar oil mixed at about 1% concentration in water, misted lightly onto the coat and avoiding the eyes, which acts as a natural repellent that ticks in particular seem to actively avoid, and it is registered by regulatory agencies as a minimum risk pesticide because of how mild it is compared to synthetic repellents. I want to be clear that not every plant oil is safe for a dog's skin. Some are genuinely harmful in concentrated form, so I stick to the ones with a long track record like properly diluted cedarwood, and I always test a small patch on the inside of the leg first, and wait a day before spraying the whole coat, the same way you would patch test anything new on a person's skin. So when you put all of this together, the weekly coat dusting, the flea comb check, the yard treatment, the hot bedding wash, and the vinegar rinse, you start to see what my grandfather actually understood, which is that flea and tick prevention was never supposed to be a monthly dose of poison. It was supposed to be a handful of small habits, repeated without skipping, that make your dog and the space around your dog an environment these insects simply cannot survive in. Think about what this actually protects beyond the itching and the scratching. Ticks carry real disease, Lyme disease, ehrlichiosis, anaplasmosis, and a dog that is constantly exposed without any protection is a dog at real risk of an illness that can take months to fully treat and thousands of dollars in vet bills if it is caught late. My grandfather used to say, "A dog tells you the truth about how it has been cared for long before it tells you with a fever, if you are willing to run your hands through its coat every single week instead of waiting for it to start scratching." I did not fully understand what he meant until years after that first bad reaction, sitting with a different dog on my lap, running the flea comb through her coat and finding nothing at all, week after week, and realizing that peace of mind was worth infinitely more than the 5 minutes it took me every Sunday morning. There is something else that happened once I switched to this method that I did not expect, which is that I actually started paying closer attention to my dogs overall, not just their fleas, because the weekly hands-on routine meant I was checking their ears, their paws, their weight, all at the same time, and I caught an ear infection early on one of my dogs, simply because I was already in the habit of running my hands over him every week for an entirely different reason. This is not really about fleas and ticks at all when you step back far enough. It is about the difference between reaching for the strongest chemical the moment you see a problem, and quietly building an environment where the problem has almost nowhere to take hold to begin with. So here's what I want you to do this week. Buy a bag of food-grade diatomaceous earth, about $6 at most farm or garden stores, and this weekend, outside, work a light dusting into your dog's coat the way I showed you. Pick up a metal flea comb and run it through your dog's coat once this week, just to see what you are starting from. Wash the bedding in hot water before you put it back down. Tell me in the comments what breed your dog is and whether fleas or ticks are the bigger problem where you live, and tell me in a month if you notice a difference, because I read every single one of these and I want to know how it goes for your dog specifically, especially if you live somewhere the tick season runs longer than it does for us here. If you are ever unsure whether a tick has been attached long enough to pose a real disease risk, or if your dog shows any sign of lethargy, fever, or joint pain after a tick bite, that is always worth a call to your vet, because prevention lowers the risk enormously, but it does not replace watching for the signs that matter. And no home method, mine included, is a substitute for that kind of attention when something actually seems wrong. The folks in my community have raised working dogs this way for generations without a single chemical collar between us. Next time, I am going to show you what we use to keep flies off the horses in the barn all summer, using nothing but 2 ingredients most people already have in their kitchen, and a trick with an old feed sack that most people have never even seen done. One my grandfather swore worked better than anything sold at the co-op.